apparent contradictions. But it is possible to have actual contradictions, and that is if within one frame of reference there's two contradictory ideas, then one of them is going to be false within that frame of reference. The last thing I want to say is that it's very dangerous to assume you know too much about Nietzsche. You really should read the passage, say what you think it means, and then comment on that. And avoid commenting on Nietzsche and saying if he was crazy or not crazy. Now, you can do that if you want, but you're going into a historical thing at that point. You're talking about Nietzsche, you're not talking about the ideas. And Nietzsche very carefully wrote his ideas in such a way that if you're going to talk about his passages, you got to talk about what you think you saw there. And yeah, that might be a crazy method that doesn't really work great. Maybe it's all nonsense in the end, like a surrealist that really has endeavored to make no point, but Nietzsche didn't do that. Among this enigma, he does make a point. He does have a consistent philosophy. His philosophy changed less than most philosophers do over the career of their writing, but it did change some. He backed out a little bit of some of the simplifications that he said in in The Birth of Tragedy, his first work, and yet there's still a lot of value in there, and it's still more or less in line with the way he analyzed things later on. Nietzsche also liked to have a lot of fun with his own intelligence, and wrote some sections of why I write such great books. I think that was Twilight of the Idols, why I write such great books and things like this. And it's a great form of intellectual humor. Anyway, his idea of being beyond good and evil is not dangerous, and his overall philosophy does come from reading all of his works. And what I get from it is someone who was a fairly skeptical thinker, a practical skeptic, a Pyrrhonistic skeptic, not an academic skeptic, not a totally nihilistic skeptic by any means. Sort of a positivist skeptic, because while he was not really at all like a positivist, as such, he did take things as they appear and work from that. Of course, my form of skepticism explains why we would do that by a method other than positivism. So he wasn't actually positivist because the reasons, and he did that. I think in positivism it's somewhat to justify our intuitions. In Nietzsche, it was just to justify thinking about things that may or may not be demonstrated. Like what is the value of truth, and what is the value of religion? What is the purpose? What roles do these things, play? And to avoid this idea of saying the whole world's an illusion, because objects are not their qualities, the whole world must be an illusion. No, to a certain degree, we that's the sense in which it's similar to positivism. It's not an illusion in the sense that we really are having these experiences, and even if we don't know why we're having them, it's not an illusion that we're having them. I think you're mistaken. I think Nietzsche's approach to making his philosophy somewhat confusing, not trying to make it easy to understand, because the problem there is that if you make something easy to understand, often what's really going on is you've made it easy for people to think they understand. They don't really understand. You use words that they're familiar to them, but you're using it in a sense that, since it's a familiar word, it means people already have a sense of that word. So if you're inventing new philosophy, how could you put your new idea into that word, if you're trying to be totally clear? The only way to put a new meaning into a word is to be at least confusing enough that people have to stop and think for themselves. What's going on? What's the idea that you're describing? What's missing? What are you saying that's missing? What are you trying to add to these terms that are somewhat familiar? There has to be room to put some confusion out there, because learning requires being confused and trying to figure out something new. There's a moment of, wait, what's this mean? That has to precede, oh, here's what it means. So, Kant's method, doesn't go along that way at all. It's trying to be perfectly clear and perfectly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the way I think it failed. I mean, that's what you try to do as a sort of a manipulation. You're trying to convince people, hey, there's this, we've just discovered there's no God, and yet there's this morality still we want to believe. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to tell you how you can still believe that. That's not as honest of a philosophy as Nietzsche, who is walking through a world that is somewhat surreal with all kinds of strange truths and painting pictures of the world. Yes, it's an artistic approach to philosophy, you know, much more so than mine, which is analytic. But, I mean, in summary, I just want to say that my approach is sort of twofold. I endorse art, and philosophy is art and all the rest. And I don't want to make a philosophy that people can just sign on to in general. I don't expect or even want people to have all of my ideas, the full set of my philosophy of how to live life. I mean, easy example is, to me, living life, I have to get in nature. I'd like to live in nature. If not live, then I'm going to go to nature. This is where I'm going to get relaxation. It's of a spiritual power to me that's an important part of how I live my life. I don't expect other people to have that. I've had many friends that grew up in an urban area and don't like to go to nature. Of course, I've lots of people that grow up in urban areas especially like to get out to nature, even though they don't want to live there. But anyway, those kinds of things are personal. So I've created this relativistic skepticism, which is a set of tools that I think we can agree on. And it's done in the kind of Kantian style, more than the Nietzschean style. I mean, people find it confusing, but people find Kant confusing too. I mean, that's just because it's technical, it's being very careful. And in the sense in which it's not confusing is that if you follow what all the terms are defined to mean and how they add together, you know, it is clear. There's no holes if you do understand the components of the system. And I go through trying to define the components and in an order from fundamental to things that are dependent on the fundamental definitions. And that's relativistic skepticism. But beyond that, there's a lot of philosophy like, you know, Nietzsche's. I mean, how are you going to philosophize about love or something like this and just be clear, and here's what it is? I mean, it's just nonsense when people say, here's what love is and X, Y, Z, and this is what you do, and this is how what women like and what men like and blah, 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 and all of that. That's just bullshit. You want to philosophize about love and religion and inspiration. The real human experience, you know, includes these things. So some part of our philosophy has to address those. Nietzsche is one of the best social philosophers we've ever had because he wrote on that level. So anyway, yeah, so I find this interesting to talk about. As I said, we're not going to agree exactly. You have a very different approach. I don't really appreciate Kant. I mean, I appreciate his historical significance, and you know, and I advocate reading his work, but it doesn't go with me, you know. I appreciate a lot of things that Aristotle brought in the same way I said about Nietzsche, because he brought some good tools into philosophy, but his overall conclusions were, you know, just wrong and wantonly so. You know, especially about natural philosophy, for example, where it didn't occur to him to check. He just wrote down his intuitions, and I'm not into that. So you and I can definitely dig up these ideas and shine lights on them from two different perspectives, because we have two different perspectives. But you could dislike Nietzsche, and that wouldn't mean much to me. But when you say an object is what its attributes are, that's just Aristotelian, and it's outdated. It's not true. They're attributes because they're attributed to the thing by a mind. And we can figure out a lot about what things are from their attributes, because the attribute is a little element of having figured out something about that thing, like it's reflecting blue light. That's what it really means. It doesn't mean it is blue. It means that thing's reflecting blue light somehow. Or in the case of the sky, it's refracting the blue light. It means the blue light's reaching my eye. You have to be careful. You can't say that blueness is in the sky. The blueness is what happens when light coming through the sky hits my eye. All right, cheers.